Okay, thank you and welcome to Navigating Conflict. I'm excited to announce and introduce Ashley Kent as our presenter this morning. Ashley is the Associate Director of the MSU Local Government Center. So she has a lot of experience all across the state in working with groups that are navigating conflict. So Ashley, thank you for being here and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Katie, and thanks for everybody for jumping on this morning. It's great that everybody's willing to grab a cup of coffee and hang out for a few minutes to discuss some of these things. This has been an awesome series, and I am happy to round it out with our navigating conflict topic. So, right off the bat, I'm going to ask you to share with us, what do you think of when you think of conflict? What does it mean to you? If you could throw your ideas in the chat, that would be great. Can be quick, kind of short and sweet. This is what conflict means. When I hear the word conflict, I think this. I know that is a lot to ask right off the bat at 8:30 in the morning. Thank you so much. All right, so challenge and disagreement. One or more parties have different ideas of the goal. Okay, interesting, Jackie, that doesn't necessarily sound like it has to be contentious, but it's a different idea. Okay, so problems, misunderstanding, differing core values, people not bowing to their wishes, example, different routes to solution, differing opinions, opposing views. Oh, this is great. Perfect. So you guys are picking up on all the things that I see as well. Different perspectives, no compromises. Yep, no meeting of the minds. Okay, so there are lots and lots of definitions of conflict, and there is no right or wrong, this is the answer, right? One of the simple definitions that we like to use is that conflict is the perceived goal interference among interdependent parties. And the reason we like this is because even if you don't think that there's a conflict, if someone else has a perception of conflict with you, there's a conflict, right? And going back to some of these, talking about not being able to meet your goals. It may not necessarily be an emotional conflict, but it could be any kind of barrier or block that's not allowing both or all parties to meet their goals. And I like the interdependent piece because it reminds us that we need the other person to reach our goal. If we didn't, we wouldn't be in conflict because we just wouldn't engage, right? We would move on without them. So the perceived goal interference among interdependent parties. That just really speaks to me and how I think about it. Now, this next quote I also absolutely love. Conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional, right? So you may have differing perspectives, you may have different ideas about how to get to the end goal. You can work through those and truly be in conflict, but not be angry. It won't be contentious. There is a way to make that happen, right? And come out better on the other side with both your relationship and your progress towards your common goal. One of the major considerations with conflict is understanding perspective, right? What is your perspective? What's the other person's perspective? So I'm going to show you a picture, just going to flash really quick, and I want you to drop in the chat what you see. And some of you may have seen this before. Play along with me. Ready? So what did you see? A duck, a rabbit. Ooh, duck, rabbit. Did anybody see both the duck and the rabbit? Yes, okay, yep, perfect. So let's take a look at it. On this side, you can see these are duck bills, and the duck is facing this way, his little eye and the back of his head. And then the rabbit is facing this way, his little bunny nose, and his mouth and his eye, and these are his ears, right? I show you this picture because I think it's important to understand that perspective plays such a big role in our conflicts. Just because I see the rabbit, and that's 100% true, doesn't mean that it is 100% true that you see the duck, right? Both are holding the same space, both are true, both are accurate. And this can get us into trouble in conflict. We know that what we experienced, what we saw, what we heard, we know that's true, right? And the other side is saying, yeah, and I know this is true. And those things can often sound like they conflict. So how do we hold the space to gather all of that information, all of those experiences, and find the solution in that common repository of information? If you haven't been able to join the earlier Leadership to Go videos. I highly recommend going back and check them out. There were some great topics, including emotional intelligence. And for me, emotional intelligence is the foundation of leadership work and conflict work. And so if we just take a quick review, the 4 pillars of emotional intelligence are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And I think it's really important to understand the more I dig into conflict and communication work, the more the research is just showing us that it really comes down to self-work, understanding yourself and how you react to situations and what behaviors are healthy, which ones detract from the goal and the relationship. You can't control the other person and you will drive yourself mad if you try, right? But you can control yourself and you can control how you show up to that conversation to make it safe and make it a place where you can get into real dialogue versus just attacking one another. Now, there's a reason that we naturally move to that place of attacking. And for me, this was kind of revolutionary in understanding conflict because I knew that when I was angry or I was in a disagreement, my brain didn't work the way it usually does. And I thought I could just power through it. I could just ignore the feelings and stay ultra logical, and that would get me through it, right? Turns out that's not the case. So let's take a look at a very kind of simplified explanation of what goes on in our brain. It's a super complex system, but what we know is that it can be broken down into 3 main pieces. This is what they call the triune brain. And the idea of this model is that we have 3 areas that really affect us when we move into a place of conflict. The first is the reptilian complex, which is also known as the lizard brain. This is the part of your brain that makes us like other mammals. It's what drives our need for food and shelter and safety. It's also what controls our involuntary responses like heart rate and breathing. It's the part of us that, when we're in danger, kicks in and has our survival and defense mechanisms. And then around that reptilian complex is what's called the limbic system. The limbic system kind of gets us in trouble a lot because it is where we have feelings, and it's also the fight, flight, or freeze trigger. So when your brain is taking in information, which it does up to 5 times a second, and categorizing it, this system only has a are we safe or are we not safe function. There's no nuance to it, right? And the neocortex, that's what makes us uniquely human. That is where we have executive function, forward thought, creativity, generosity, complex decision or discussion is processed in the neocortex. So reptilian complex, very basic, very defense-oriented. Neocortex, very much logical, big picture, and nuance. That limbic system acts as a bridge. You can either be in lizard brain or in neocortex, but not in both. And the limbic system is categorizing, are we safe or are we not safe? So the neocortex can tell if there's a grizzly bear standing in front of us, that's a different kind of danger than if somebody offends us, right? We know that logically. But the limbic system doesn't have that distinction. Are we safe or are we not safe? It will trigger a physiological response, whether it's the physical threat or a threat to our ego. And it has a storytelling system, so it can extrapolate and predict the end to help keep us safe. So if it rained yesterday and it froze last night, and I go drive on the highway this morning, my limbic system is telling me, based on past experience, there's a good chance the road's slick. Don't slam on your brakes, right? So it does this over and over. And as long as we give it just enough information that it can extrapolate a likely ending, it gives us a little shot of oxytocin, which is a feel-good hormone or chemical. So we get chemically addicted to our own brain and we don't even know that it's happening. The challenge with this is that that storytelling system just has to make sense. It doesn't have to be true. And we see this come into play when we are in interactions with other people and we start to try to attribute motivation to behavior. So somebody says something that's a little bit rude or insensitive or whatever it may be to you, and your limbic system immediately says, we are in danger. All resources to lizard brain. Now, have you ever been in an argument with someone, and like 5 hours later, you come up with a really good comeback? Most people have had that happen, right? What happens is when you're in that argument in the moment, you are in lizard brain. You can't access those really good arguments that come from the neocortex. That's where you get the complex thought, right? and that several hours in between, that's when the adrenaline, which was given kind of an injection when the limbic system said, you're unsafe, go to lizard brain, takes those several hours for that to kind of deplete out of your body so you can walk back across that limbic bridge to get to your neocortex. So I think this is just really helpful in understanding why we do what we do when we get into conflict. Now, how do you tell when this happens? It's really, really hard. So I want you to think about, how do you feel? What are some of the signs your body gives you? Remember, this is registering as a physical threat. So this could be if you are in physical danger. It could be if you have to have a difficult conversation with your boss or a coworker. It could be establishing boundaries with in-laws. It could be all kinds of things, right? So think about, for you, what is your physiological response? It could be increased heart rate. Your voice could go up. You could get sweaty palms. You could get that kind of pit in your stomach. For me, my ears get bright red when I am deep in lizard brain, so I never present with my hair up because I don't want to give that information away. So think about, for you, what does that look like? And how can you tell you're in lizard brain? And there's that very extreme bright red ears version, right? And there's also a more subtle, I know for me, when someone pushes up against one of my values, that their behavior is inconsistent with my value, or says something that I think is inappropriate, whatever it may be, I very subtly move from trying to understand them to trying to correct them, and I start judging what they say and trying to find inaccuracies. That's a subtle shift for me, helping me know that I'm starting to slip into lizard brain. So I want you to think about, what does that look like for you? Now, like I said, the limbic system, it's all about the story, right? So what it does, we observe an event, something we actually see and hear, and then immediately, within a fifth of a second, that system is trying to tell us a story about what we just observed. So we saw somebody do something. Well, they must have done that because X, right? And then we have a natural feeling response, but that response is based on the story we tell ourselves, not on what we observed. And then we act based on our feeling. So it's really helpful to be able to pull out the facts and the story and separate those, even though it happens so quickly. And it takes a lot of conscious, concerted effort to do it. So I'm going to give you some tools that will help you move from lizard brain back across that limbic bridge into neocortex, where you can use some of those higher level executive functions. The first one, and this information comes out of the research in a subsequent book, Crucial Conversations. I think it's incredibly valuable. The first tool they give you is the state my path method. So typically when somebody's angry, we see their act, right? That last step. And we don't have any explanation for what's happening behind it. Likely there's a lot of feeling that came in, that they worked through to get to that action, them finally standing up and saying something. Instead, if you can focus on this state method, which is share your facts, tell your story, ask for the other's path, and then the last two are how you do it. You talk tentatively and you encourage testing. And this is important because what you do then is you reduce the aggression in the conversation, and lizard brain is designed to respond to aggression with more aggression, right? And so what you do is then say, hey, I saw X. I saw this happen. The story I'm telling myself is, and you give them what you know, is that true, or is there something else that I'm not understanding? And that's, I see Katie asked, so what does others' paths mean? That's what you're doing. When you ask for others' paths, you invite them into the conversation without being accusatory, right? Hey, you said this to me yesterday. The story I'm telling myself is that you don't trust my work and you're questioning the result. Is that true, or is there something I'm missing? So they have a chance to share their side of the story, their duck and bunny, right? And you can work through it without getting to a place of combat. And the last two, talk tentatively, bring that tension down and encourage testing. Because if what you know is the whole truth, it'll stand up. And if it's not, you're going to learn something, okay? So that's the first tool. The second tool, which I absolutely love, and I use this every day, even if I'm not in conflict. I don't want, I do want. Remember, you can only do complex statements in your neocortex, right? So you have to create this statement in neocortex, which helps draw you out of your brain. And the other person has to process it in neocortex, so it helps them as well. So you can say, I don't want you to think that I don't trust your work. I do want to make sure that we've double verified everything so that nobody can question you or I when we present this out to our audience, right? So whatever is in your I don't want statement, if you don't clarify that, when you get into lizard brain and you move from trying to reach the goal to suddenly I'm trying to win because it's a defense response, when you get there, whatever you put in your I don't want will be what it looks like you're trying to do. So you clarify, I don't want this. I do want this, right? So I think this is incredibly useful. And like I said, I use it every day. I've started to hear the people that I work with most use it back to me, which is incredibly satisfying because that means it's valuable to them too. And that's just exciting. And then finally, the last one is mutual purpose. So between 70 and 90% of the information or the facts in argument or a conflict or disagreement, both sides agree on. 10 to 30% they disagree on. We almost always focus on that 10 to 30%, right? So the best way to approach that conversation is to start with what are we working on together? And we identify that mutual purpose. Even if you have to go super macro and you say, I agree that it's important that we talk about this. And that's the only thing you know that you agree on, right? I agree that it's important. Identify the things that you are working on together, because what that does is it shifts the conversation from an adversarial standpoint, me versus you, to us versus a problem. I think it's really helpful as well to align your conversation space, whether it's a walking meeting, a sit-down meeting, whatever it may be. Align it so that you are representing being on the same team. What does that mean? It means that you need to be conscious and aware of the space. Try very hard when you have to have a difficult conversation to not have a physical piece of furniture between you and the other person. A table, a desk, anything that could be in the way. Because your brain registers that as a power imbalance, and now that other person is inaccessible to you, or vice versa. The much better option is to align yourself and sit side by side, and then have the issue that you're discussing or dealing with in front of both of you. It could be on a whiteboard, it could be on a flip chart, it could be on a piece of paper. But now you subtly are shifting this dynamic, and it's us versus the problem instead of you versus me. Much more likely that you're going to come to a shared outcome that works for everyone. Okay? So that is a whirlwind tour of 3 of the tools, and there's all kinds that we could talk about, but I don't want to overload. I just want to share some takeaway advice. For me, what's helpful is to choose one of these skills or concepts and practice it. Practice it until you're comfortable, so it doesn't feel like it's awkward and kind of unnatural to add into a conversation. Practice with the people closest to you, and you can tell them, hey, I learned this new tool and I really want to try it. It's gonna feel awkward, so bear with me. And as you practice it, it'll become more comfortable. And remember that communication and self-awareness and leadership development as a whole is an ongoing practice. It's not something that you learn the skill one day, you check the box and you can move on, right? This is a lifelong journey. So give yourself some grace. You're gonna mess up, and that's completely okay. But the fact that you're here and even interested tells me that you're already well on your way. All right, I'm gonna share the works cited page so you can see where this information comes from. And then Katie, if it's all right with you, I'm gonna stop and we can take some time for any questions that are out there.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. That was a lot of really good information. Please, folks, put questions in the window. We have about 10 minutes to talk with Ashley. To maybe start us off, Ashley, I'd love to have you maybe expand or give a little more advice. You talked about pulling fact from story. Can you share some ideas on how you might do that, particularly if this is new to someone and they haven't tried that? How do you actually go about doing that?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Um, One of my favorite tools, and you can do this with someone else or for yourself, and say, hey, I can see that you're really upset and this is bothering you. Tell me what happened. And they'll tell you, or you'll tell yourself, this big story about what happened and why it happened, right? And then you can say, okay, I think I'm starting to understand. Can you tell me what were the actions you saw, or what were the exact words that you heard? And so you can start to kind of pull that out of the story. And a lot of times it may be that you don't exactly remember because the story has taken over so much. But what did you actually see? What did you hear? And then there's this idea of the most generous alternative explanation. So you can act kind of as a crime scene investigator. There's all of these facts and they fit this scenario really well. But could they fit another scenario? Could it be that this person is having a really bad day? It had nothing to do with you, even though that's what your brain likes to tell you. It has nothing to do with you. They had a really bad day and you just happened to be the person that had that interaction. What is the most generous alternative explanation? Typically, the truth is somewhere between those two ends. But that's a way to practice it, at least for me.
Great. Thanks. And I think one of the things I'd love to emphasize that you shared there is like finding a trusted peer or friend to really help with this, because that's where I feel like I've made a lot of progress in kind of figuring out where I tend to go with my stories and have someone who like checks me. Now, Katie, stop. What are you doing here?
Yeah.
Um,
And being that person is hard too, right? Because it's somebody
mhm,
that you care about. And you have to kind of
yeah.
hold up that mirror and say, is that accurate?
Yeah. Great. We have another question from Kimberly. How do you prepare yourself mentally and emotionally when your conflict presents where there is a definitive power dynamic?
Oh, that's a great question, Kimberly. So I think it's important to check in with yourself and recognize, am I already in lizard brain? Because if you're going into a conversation, especially if there's a perception that you are on the lower end of that power dynamic, you could already be in that defense mode. Your body's trying to protect you, right? So just take a minute, pause, and recognize what's happening in your body. If you can name it, it often will lose a lot of its power over you. I also think it's incredibly important and incredibly powerful to recognize that you don't have to engage in a conversation when you are in that state. You don't have to power through. Give yourself permission to say, hey, this conversation is really important to me. So you're recognizing the importance. I really want to know what you think. I respect your opinion. So the other person knows you're not blowing them off. And I'm not sure that I can take in this information, or you're halfway through the conversation. I'm not sure I can process what you're sharing with me right now. Is it okay if we take a break and come back? Take as many breaks as you need to be successful. Because if you are in lizard brain, it's really hard to get to your end goal. So check in with yourself, see what's going on, and when you're ready, step into it. And don't think that once you're into it, if you need to take a break, that is failure or that's you not prepared enough. That's a natural reaction for your body, right? So just self-awareness over and over and over. And I know, Kimberly, that's probably not super reassuring as you're ready to go into it with all the facts and the figures, but that's what I've seen.
Great. Thanks. We have a few more minutes, so if you have any other questions, please feel free to put them in. Ashley, I'd love you to touch on, let's say you're a member of a group and you're seeing this conflict arise between two other members, but you yourself aren't feeling yourself drawn into it. What kind of thoughts do you have on what you can do from that position?
I think it depends on your relationship with the other people. If it's somebody that I'm really comfortable with, I could say, "Hey, looks like something might be going on here. Is there something that you want to talk about and maybe dissect before it gets into some kind of bigger conflict?" I also think it's really important if you think about group dynamics to think about Tuckman's model and recognize that ongoing conflict or conflict that shows up doesn't necessarily mean that the group's broken, but just think about it in context of a bigger picture. We hit a roadblock, let's figure it out. If you need supported discussion, which means having somebody come in and be a neutral third party to be there as an accountability buddy or as a mediator, that is not failure. That's you finding your resources to be successful. And that doesn't have to wait until it's a blow up conversation. Say, hey, we're not quite clicking very well, this other person and I. Would you mind just sitting in with us? Make sure both people are willing to do that. Would you mind sitting in with us and helping us work through this so that we can be successful moving forward and not have this conflict impede our work? And Katie, I would love to know what you think about that because you're kind of an expert in that area.
Well, I just want to point out two things and emphasize I love what you just shared there is like the power of bringing in someone neutral or someone um, who is not tied to an outcome of a conversation or a group work or that conflict, and just the power in that. I also love that you framed it. Conflict's not always negative. Really positive things can come from conflict when it's managed and navigated well towards an outcome and doesn't just evolve into full on kind of emotional relationship damage. So, I do some conflict work with folks, and it's not everyone can go to this space of like, oh, conflict can be good. So I would just kind of challenge you all to think about that as you head out, or invite you to think about, okay, what good things come from conflict when it's done well, and just recognize that it's a normal part of any process because we're all kind of complex, messy human beings on occasion, and when we come together, that can lead to complex, messy situations.
Yep.
Um,
And if well done, really resilient outcomes, right?
yeah, yeah, and build relationships and trust, and it can be a really strengthening exercise for groups.
Absolutely.
Couple minutes
Kimberly,
left. Uta has a great question about, do you have podcasts or books you recommend? This
I
could be
am
endless.
I will forever be a Brene Brown fangirl. She has two podcasts, one that's more work related and one that's kind of a personal podcast. I think she shares great information. And what I enjoy about her work is that she's focused on that self awareness, that perspective, understanding what you can and can't control. Adam Grant is another great one. He's an organizational psychologist at Harvard, I think. Does a great job. So those are just two off the top of my head. I could give you a whole list, Uta. Just give me a call and we'll spend days on book lists. And Kimberly, that's a great question. So she asked, what about if you're the one in the higher end of the power dynamic? If you have that imbalance, how do you approach that conversation? I say make sure the other person knows that they have authority and agency in the conversation as well. So you can say, hey, we need to talk about this thing that happened. I want to hear your side of the story. I appreciate and value working with you so they know that you're not trying to attack them. And when you're ready, let me know. We'll set up a time. So give them the control and just invite them into the conversation, but just say, hey, ready when you are. It's up to you. I'll take a vacation day and call you. Perfect.
Great. Well, if we have no more questions, Ashley, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us today. Lots of resources there on the screen. You're welcome to reach out to Ashley. She's available and interested, and me as well. We can continue to connect you all with topics. We're planning something like this for the fall, so stay tuned for that email later this week and share your ideas with us. Otherwise, we will send you off into your Tuesday. Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.